these days we receive mixes almost exclusively as files. That's changed a lot just in the 20 few years I've been doing this. We'd often get stuff in on tape, then we'd get stuff in on DAT, and then we'd get stuff in on CDRs. Those tape was beautiful, obviously. I miss mastering from tape, but it makes me sound like an old grumpy old sound engineer. But these days, DATs and CDs were fixed at 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit. These days, almost everybody's recording at higher resolution than that. If they're not, they should be. So these days, generally, a client that walks into the studio usually has an external drive or a memory stick. We literally plug that into the studio Mac and open the files. They're usually 24-bit. They're always stereo. The principle of mastering is we start with the finished stereo mix and then carry on working in stereo. So it's in the bus compression end of things. Sometimes people send stems these days. That's a question we're often asked. Do you accept mastering on stems? My answer to that usually is, if your mix is good, there's no need to go to stems. If you're asking about stems, does that suggest that you're not confident about the levels in your mix? Is that why you're asking? And I'll usually say, send me the mix first of all. If it's great, we won't need the stems. If it has something that needs addressing, I might ask you as an engineer to do that first. Or if for whatever reason I'm feeling the need, then yes, we can reach for stems. And then they'd be stereo stems, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different elements of the mix given separately. So that leads on to your second question about the communication between us as mastering engineers and the mixing engineer and the composer, the musician. I feel very strongly that communication is crucial to the outcome. It's not just about, I know what's best, I've been mastering for 24 years and I have the equipment, so I'll tell you how your record should sound. A record, a song, is a very personal thing to the composer or to the musician who's written it, the songwriter. And the recording and the mix is a precious thing to the producer, because they put in a lot of hours and a lot of blood, sweat, tears and hard cash into the process. So it's very important for me at that point to get to know the person and to find out what they're trying to convey, coming back to that very basic communication between a songwriter and a music fan. If I can, the better I get to know the musician, the better I get to know what he's trying to convey, then the better I can apply the tools that we all have to the process in the middle to get that across to the music listener. So I'll always be in touch with them. Tell me more. What do you want? What do you need? How loud do you want it? How do you feel about the songs? Is there anything about the mix you want me to look at? So yeah, first of all, that communication is really important to me personally as an engineer, as a mastering engineer. I am, say this tactfully, I am led to believe that not all mastering services feel the same way. There are some very famous online mastering services who shall remain tactically nameless, who won't allow that communication between the artist and the engineer. That to me is beyond comprehension. How I wouldn't want to sit down to work on someone's song without knowing anything about them. So that's my personal approach and our approach as a company. That's to us a very important part. And also there's the communication between the mastering engineer and the producer or the mix engineer, because we can talk on a technical level that maybe the artist or the musician or the composer can't. That's not a generalization. I think a lot of musicians and composers these days are getting very getting, rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. So becoming very knowledgeable about that side of things and are able to be a part of that conversation. But not everyone is. So there's a technical back and forth communication that happens between mastering engineer and mix engineer, which we can discuss, like, how is the bass sitting, that relationship between the kick and the bass drum. I can say, is that deliberate? And they say, well, yeah, actually, because we were trying to create a club feel on this song, so this is important to us within the context of the mix. So yeah, that all those lines of communication really need to be open, like I mentioned earlier, because all of that to me is part of the mastering process, but it's before we even plugged anything into anything. It's before we've even started processing stuff. How long does it take to master a song? In the studio, a single song is between 1 and 2 hours of work if you're starting from scratch, because part of that is the communication. You have a conversation, you listen to the song a few times, you're getting a feel for it, and then you start trying out different approaches in the mastering room. You try this processor, you try that processor, you start experimenting with bringing the volume up, and you're trying different limiters. You're playing with this EQ or that EQ. You may be looking at an analog signal path versus a digital or a combination of both. So all of those things are dependent on the song and the program material. None of it is a formula. And then you continue working on the song and getting it to a point where I'm happy and I can send it on out. So that's an hour to 2 hours. On an album or a project with a number of songs, an EP or an album, it gets quicker then as the work progresses, because the second song might take a little bit shorter because we've made some of the decisions then, and we're starting to compare the second song to the first song. At this point, you might adjust some of the processing or change some of the signal paths, but you've set up your working space. You've kind of established the sound that we're working towards. And then as an album progresses, I might get to track 3 and go, you know what, this is a similar instrumentation and a similar vibe to track 3. So I might go back, check my notes. And so as you progress through an album, it gets quicker. So usually I allow a day to master an album, and there might be a bit of tidying up to do in a few days or in a week's time when everybody's listened to everything and maybe some small changes need to be made. An hour to 2 for a mix and a day or so for an album. From a turnaround point of view, we aim for a week's turnaround. So the real answer is we can master that song in a week. We can do it for you by this time next week. And obviously we're juggling a number of clients. And then we have clients who say, I need this back really urgent. Those clients are usually calling me from Bombay, because people over here are usually they've got a bit more time on their hands. So the urgent film soundtracks where the production company is shouting for the masters, they're often end up doing, say, a late night session or an over the weekend session to fit that in around other people. So we usually charge a bit of a premium for that. But yes, taking our time, about a week. In a hurry, we can usually turn it around in 24 to 48 hours, depending on the requirements. A lot of the songs, almost all the songs we receive from India are in Hindi or some of the other regional languages, in Tamil or Telugu or Marathi. We do a lot of Marathi films these days. It's not a problem as such to work in a different language. It just sometimes means I've got to ask, what song is this? What's it about? I'm getting better at picking up Hindi words. Zindagi usually turns up in a song somewhere. Ishq often turns up. So, and really you can pick up the vibe of the song from the song. You can tell if it's a love song. You can tell if it's if everybody's rocking out, then it needs to have a good rocking feel to it. If it's a big club sounding dance song, then it needs to sound like a big dance hit. So I don't feel it's a hindrance to us. I do feel I'd like to learn Hindi. I think that's on my list of things I'd like to do. It'd be great to be able to understand the songs and come to Bombay and talk to you in Hindi. That'd be great. So I'll put that on my list. You got a question on Facebook from Shantanu asking about the difference between mastering for Bollywood film songs as opposed to top 40 or Western songs. To me, it's a stylistic thing, a genre thing. It applies across a number of genres as well. And film music has a certain Hindi film music and Indian film music in general has a certain sound that everybody loves out there. There's the vocals are really upfront. They're often double tracked and panned left and right. You've got like 150 tracks. There's like everything's in there, everything in the kitchen sink, percussions and drums and strings and horns and loads of vocals, and by the time, and I really respect your mix engineers who can make sense of those 150 tracks and whittle them down to stereo where I can start work on them. But there's a particular style, and it's bright and it's upfront and it's in your face, and it needs to be loud. So the records I master for Indian films are among the loudest records that I master at all. I think only Nigerian hip hop goes louder than Bollywood films. I should point you at some of those. They're hilarious. But top 40 hits. There is a requirement for loudness in top 40 and chart. I'll call that pop generally, because over here we have people who write pop music with the specific aim of getting in the charts, and we have people who then write more kind of music for themselves and for the more discerning listener, so less for the mass market. And those two people who are more into the music side of things are less worried about loudness and volume. In a Western pop top 40 context, then yes, volume is an issue, and you're aiming at not far off what we aim for Bollywood records, but the production values are different. Yes, there's brightness, but there's a bit more. Obviously, it depends on the kind of pop music, but there seems to be a bit more space in that kind of stuff, and things are produced a bit more crisply, and there's more gaps in the music and more space in the mix, and so that takes a different approach from how you're mastering it. So if I've got a crisp, clean pop track with lots of space, I'd be doing different things to say a film song which has got all those layers in. I might be in a film song trying to clear up and get some space into there, whereas in a pop top 40 situation, I might just be taking what it is and just making it bigger and badder. So it's kind of subtle, but I think the summary is it's a genre thing. As mastering engineers, we work in all kinds of genres, and the thing to do is to get to know a genre, immerse yourself in it, listen to lots of stuff in that vernacular, and then adjust what we're doing accordingly. You asked about people back in India who might be getting involved in mastering, and can I share some hints and tips and tricks? Certainly, the very first one is be very careful. Do everything you can with your listening environment. Your listening environment is your best friend when you're taking someone else's mixes and making judgments on it, and making changes to it and sending it back to them. So not everybody is able to have a perfect listening environment, and I totally respect that. The thing to do if you're not 100% sure of your listening environment is do it there, then take it everywhere else and play it. Take it out to the car, play it there. Take it home, play it on a normal stereo, play it through your laptop's rubbish little speakers. Take it around to your mum's house. Take it around to your friend's house who's got that awesome hi-fi. Take it to a gig and play it through the PA system there when you're setting up. Give it to the sound engineer next time you're playing. Can you play this through your PA rig, please? And by listening in all those different listening environments, you'll pick up the impression of how it's like, of what it's like. The principle of having the balanced mastering room, which is why mastering engineers spend so much time, money, and effort on their listening environment, is the principle being, if I can make it sound balanced in a balanced listening environment, then it will translate well onto other systems. So if you play it on small rubbish laptop speakers, it'll sound a bit small and a bit rubbish. If you play it on a big sound system with exaggerated bass, it'll sound big and it'll have exaggerated bass. If you play it on something that's a bit MIDI and a bit small, it'll sound a bit MIDI and small, but it'll take on the characteristics of the playback system. So if you don't have the perfectly balanced room, then take it around those playback systems and just work on getting the impression of how it translates. From an equipment point of view, digital audio workstations all do the same job in subtly different ways. It's the best digital audio workstation to use is the one that you're totally comfortable using, because then it stops becoming a technical thing that you're thinking about, and it becomes a tool to serve the art and to serve the artist and the song. Personally, we use Reaper here. We're big fans of Reaper. It sounds transparent. It's very, very reasonable. When you do come round, when your conscience gets the better of you, you can pay. It's very light, crashes about once a month. So personally, I'm a big fan of Reaper as a digital audio workstation. Equipment-wise, we run a combination of analog and digital equipment here. So we have EQs, compressors and limiters by Manley, Summit, Prism Mass Select converters by Digital Audio Denmark. And then in the plugin realm, Waves plugins, Ozone plugins, Slate plugins. You have a pile of tools, and when it comes to a particular song, you just reach for the tools that apply to that suit that song best. It's rarely twice exactly the same, and with experience you get to know what works and what doesn't. So if people are if you've got equipment and you're doing some mastering and you're doing everything in the box, maybe a good next investment would be a nice outboard stereo bus compressor, or it might be a nice analog EQ where you can do some of that noise, that sound shaping, the tonal shaping in the analog domain rather than in the digital domain. One of the reasons most high-end mastering studios have a combination of analog and digital equipment is that, well, the analog equipment just sounds better. Even today, with really high sample rates and with incredibly good algorithms, there is something that you get out of an analog piece of outboard gear that is very, very hard to replicate in the digital realm. And the one key piece of advice, if you've watched this video all the way through to here, then you've earned this piece of advice. And I think it's where a lot of people fall over and a lot of harm is done to a lot of records, is when you do a bunch of things to a record and you go, okay, I've done some compression, I've done some EQing, I've done some limiting, I'm kind of happy with where this sits. When you listen A-B something, pull down the volume of the after version, so you're listening to the mix and the master at exactly the same perceived volume. Because if you listen to them that way, then the louder one will sound better because of the way your ears works, because of the way the room reacts. Louder just does sound better with the volume control. It doesn't always sound better if you've killed the dynamics to get there. So it's my personal opinion that a lot of harm has been done to a lot of records over the years by people calling up a few presets on a mastering plugin, listening before, listening after. It's like, oh, wow, great, that sounds so much better. Well, of course it sounds better. It's 8 dBs louder. Pull it down 8 decibels. And if you've done all that multiband and excitement and stereo, all that stuff that you can do in plugins that really most of the time you shouldn't, if you pull it down to the same volume and you go A, B, you go, do you know what? That mix sounded better. I've killed it. So I think that would be my one tip. Always listen to the processing you're doing. Always listen before and after at the same perceived volume, because that's the only way you'll make an objective decision on how it sounds. If you listen like that, you can't tell. It's just not possible. A lot of music comes in online now as files. A lot of the time we're working with clients, remote clients in a different part of the country or in a different country or continent. Quite often these days we receive mixes that have already been peak limited. They've already been through some kind of a mastering process, a bus compressor already. And that's always a problem for us. I'll go into it in technical detail another time. We're going to put a video tutorial up about it. But the short version is, when it's been limited, when everything's already been kind of squashed up like that, there's a lot less space in there. There's a lot less we're able to do. The technical reasons for that. Firstly, peak limiting should be done it's the very, very last stage of the mastering process. All your EQing and compression and all that subtle, nice stuff to shape the mix and get it sounding good should be done before the peak limiting, because the peak limiting is, like we said before, it's distortion, and it's trying to get that distortion in a way where it's least damaging and it sounds the best it can at that volume. So if I receive a mix that's already been peak limited, it really restricts what we're able to do. So, for example, if a mix is limited and the peaks are clipped, but it sounds okay like that, it doesn't sound too bad. Any EQ that I try and do, EQ by its nature shifts the phase. And so immediately you're shifting the phase of that distortion from a place where it was quite comfortable, and you're throwing it right back into the audible spectrum. You're throwing it right back in front of you. So if I'm working with a mix like that, you try and do something, okay, that sounds a bit harsh in the high mids, I'll adjust that. Well, that just sounds more distorted now. And you try a bunch of things, and each one of them, as you switch it in, it just makes it sound worse. So from a process point of view, the first thing I'll do at that point is get straight back in touch with the engineer and say, dude, do you realise what you sent me here? This is really restricting what we can do. Sometimes the client says, sure, sorry, no problem, I'll just back it off and send you it again, which is the answer I'm always hoping for. Sometimes I'm in touch with the client and the client said, this is all I've got. I haven't been given anything else. I can't get in touch with the engineer. He's left the country, or his hard drive crashed, or whatever reasons why he can't get into the mix and do it again. Which case I have to run with it. The third example is when the mix engineer has mixed from the beginning through the mastering plugin. So first thing he does is pull up Ozone or whatever, sticks it across, or T-Rack, sticks it across the mix bus, pull up some presets, and then start mixing. There's no way back from that, because throughout the whole mix process, the engineer has every single mix decision he's made listening through the mastering process. So if I say, can you take that off, please? His mix becomes something completely different, because he's never worked it to not have the mastering process on it. So there are a few examples of how that bit can go. So if it comes to it and I'm here and the mix is peak limited and there's no way around it, I've asked everybody, there's nothing to go around it, then it becomes it's bit of a do the best we can job. So at this point, we're literally not able. Most of the time, there's always compromises involved. For example, you can use some phase linear EQ, which doesn't change the phase, but that restricts your EQ choices to 1 out of a dozen EQs. So you have less choices there. If you need to roll off some of the subs, for example, then all the peaks suddenly come back in, and I'm having to limit it again. So it's been limiting twice. So you tend to do less rather than more. If it's been quite heavily processed digitally, often the thing that works is to not touch it with another digital processor, just to run it through the analog chain on some light settings. Just use the analog signal path to soften what's going on and like control it and manage it and do subtler bits of EQ. So it is doable, and we do it a lot. A lot of the, I'm not going to guess at percentages, but a significant percentage of the mixes we receive are like that and can't be changed. So it's a different process. You reach for a different bag of tricks. I have experience from doing that. So you do what's needed, but it's never as good as if someone sends a mix with plenty of headroom for mastering. Plenty of headroom doesn't mean pull down the master fader by 6 dBs so that it's still completely peak limiting and peaking at minus 6 dBs, because I can normalize that in about a third of a second and we're back to square one. So that doesn't count. So yeah, that's my piece of advice. If you're sending stuff for mastering, please, from the very beginning of your mix, don't mix through mixbus processors, and just work to get the mix sounding great as it is. And then if you send it to a good mastering engineer, it'll come back sounding even better. That's the ideal. Work the mix so it sounds fantastic and you're happy with it, the client loves it, everybody's loving the mix, and that mix will come back sounding even better. So that's my thoughts on loud mixes.